Now, an important clarification before we begin. This is a retrospective of the 2008 original Tales of Hearts for the Nintendo DS, not the 2013 Vita remake Tales of Hearts R. I figured I should make this distinction clear as the two games are quite different despite arguably being the same game. Now, with that distinction out of the way, let's look back at the third and final Tales game on the Nintendo DS. Tales of Hearts is a game I go into with curious interest. I played the Vita remake about 3 years ago and wasn't particularly impressed with the game. From its by-the-numbers story to its combat that didn't quite feel up to the series, I found the game rather underwhelming. So I come into Hearts DS cautiously optimistic. Were Hearts R's biggest downfalls just parts of a shoddy remake, or was the game always like this? Let's find out as I dive into Tales of Hearts for the Nintendo DS. Now quickly before we begin, this Tales of Hearts retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons, Alan and Cameron Strauss. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content. And now, on with the rest of the video. Development for what would become the Namco Tales Studio's only main series entry on a handheld would begin in late 2006, during the debugging phase of the PS2 remake of Tales of Destiny. By this time it had become pretty clear that the future of the series lay in 3D games, with another 2D game being too hard to justify for the new 7th gen consoles. Thus, Team Destiny would move to abandon the classic 2D formula and would begin work on their first ever 3D Tales game to release in 2009. However, before then, a group of Team Destiny members led by Tales of Destiny PS2 director Hideo Baba would get to work on one last send-off for the classic 2D Tales games, pitching the idea for the Nintendo DS, where the lack of 3D could be justified. Baba's team would be joined by several Team Symphonia members, marking the first time the two Tales studios worked together since Tales of Eternia. The game would initially take form as a DS port of Tales of Destiny PS2, with it using multiple assets from that game. However, it would later morph into its own game built around an original story. Much like DIMPs and Alpha systems before them, the team would struggle with how to work within the confines of the Nintendo DS. The team really wanted to utilise the DS's twin screens and touch-based capabilities, but would end up only making small utilisations. As for the story, the team would focus on the idea of the many people of the world having their hearts changed for the better, which would become the game's namesake and characteristic genre of a meeting between hearts RPG. Much like all previous Team Destiny games, Mutsumi and Amada would once again design the characters, but as I talked about in the Tales of Innocence episode, she would face immense pressure due to working on both games simultaneously. As for the main characters, a unique trend in the game would be the fact that they'd all be derived from ores and gemstones. As the game neared completion, the team made the odd choice to split the game into two versions. One would use regular 2D anime cutscenes made by Production IG, as had been the norm in the series since Tales of Destiny. Meanwhile, another version would be made using 3D CGI cutscenes in place of the 2D anime one. The 3D CGI cutscenes were developed by the animation studio Shirogumi using a 3-man team, and the final result would be not good. In later interviews, the development team would go on to explain the reason for a second CGI version of the game was simply a result of wanting to try something new in a game that was already quite an experimental project to begin with. However, other rumours indicated that the CGI version was intended for a release in the West, which would never end up happening, with the DS version remaining a Japanese exclusive. The game would later come to the West in the form of the PS Vita remake Tales of Hearts R, which exclusively used the 2D anime cutscenes. With development wrapping up, the game would be set for release on the 18th of December 2008 in Japan. A year later, in 2009, an English fan translation of the game would once again be attempted by Absolute Zero. However, the later announcement of Tales of Hearts R for a Western release would see the translation project be put on hold, and then later dropped when Absolute Zero decided to cease all operations in 2018. As of now, the best I was able to get was a simple menu translation of the anime cutscene version done by the user Dawnbomb, who was nice enough to help out with making this video. And it'll be this version that I'll be using for this retrospective. The story begins with the siblings of Kohaku and Hisui Hearts on the run from a mysterious assailant. Becoming cornered on a cliff ledge over the ocean, the two plunge into the ocean just in time to avoid their pursuer's attack. We as the player are then informed about a prophecy pertaining to the two moons in the night sky. The ebony moon is doomed to tumble, the ivory moon is fated to crumble. The prophecy also mentions a sleeping princess and a hero who can save the world from destruction. We then jump to the small village of Seaville, where we meet a protagonist, Shing Meteorite, or Core Meteor if you're playing Hearts R, who is having his ass handed to him in training by his grandfather Zex, or Sidon if you're playing Hearts R. Darn it Namco, why did you do this? Oh, I guess I should also add to the name confusion by mentioning that Kahaku is called Amber in a cameo battle appearance in Tales of Grace's F, meaning that practically no one in this game has any name consistency. Anyway, I've got majorly sidetracked. After battling, Shing and Zex are about to relax on an after-training meal when a man from the neighbouring village comes to ask Zex for help due to a case of despair occurring, a disease that destroys a person's spiria. As a Soma master, Zex has the ability to dive into people's spiria and heal them. Zex takes off to the nearby village but orders Shing to stay put, much to his frustration. Annoyed that he can't follow Zex, Shing walks down to the beach where he finds the washed up bodies of Kahaku and Hisui. Shing initially tries mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on Kahaku, leading to a big misunderstanding when Kahaku wakes up. With both Kahaku and Hisui recovered from their plunge, the two mention they are looking for Zex, to which Shing reveals that he is Zex's grandson, but also informs them that Zex is out of town. With the siblings questioning Shing's true identity, he reveals his grandfather's spiria to prove his case. Seeing his Soma, Kahaku inquires if Shing has another Soma, to which Shing confirms there is another kept at a shrine out of town. Under request from Kahaku, Shing leads the siblings to the shrine, where Kahaku is able to remove the seal and free a Soma which used to belong to Shing's mother. Kahaku begins to ask Shing if she can borrow the Soma when suddenly Inka Ross, your sailor from earlier, shows up. Inka Ross immediately casts a curse on Kahaku, knocking her out. Shing then attacks Inka Ross using his Soma, but when she is about to respond with a fatal attack, Zex shows up and takes the blow instead to protect Shing. Enraged that Inka Ross has hurt his grandfather, Shing attacks Inka Ross with a hidden power that takes her completely by surprise and cripples her. With Inka Ross crippled, the group flee from the shrine and head back to town. Back at Shing's home, Hisui attempts to heal Zex while Shing attempts to dive into Kahaku's spiria to undo the curse. Venturing deep into Kahaku's spiria, Shing finds a mysterious green-haired girl. The girl reveals her name to be Lithia, and claims to be an old friend of Zex. When Lithia mentions Inka Ross, Shing becomes consumed with revenge and begins to resonate the same power he used to cripple a witch. Realizing the power is a threat to Kahaku's spiria, Lithia is forced to abandon Kahaku's body along with her spiria, splitting up and sending fragments around the world. Emerging from Kahaku's body, Hisui confronts Shing to what happened. Shing then reveals Kahaku has lost all of her spiria, with the exception of her kindness, leaving her as nothing more than an emotionless robot. Hisui is about to beat the crap out of Shing for destroying Kahaku's spiria when Zex interrupts. Using his last breath, Zex reveals that if the group can find all of Kahaku's spiria fragments, they can restore her complete spiria. Soon after, Zex dies and Shing and Hisui bury him before setting off with Kahaku to journey around the world to find all of her spiria fragments. The story continues from there, and as per usual, if you want the full story, you can find cutscene compilations of Hearts R online, as well as this playlist by Aggression, who's done a playthrough of the DS version with full English commentary, link in the description below. Unlike the previous DS Tales games, Tales of Hearts does not use 3D character models, instead using the 2D style used in Tales of Destiny on the PS2. This includes the PS2 remake's use of 3D backgrounds instead of matte paintings. While the style of presentation is much less compromised by the DS's limited specs, I wouldn't necessarily say I find Tales of Hearts a better looking game in comparison to the previous Tales of Innocence. It really comes down to a personal preference of do you like 2D or 3D Tales games more. One thing that's definitely quite the improvement over the previous DS Tales games is the use of in-game anime cutscenes, helping make the game feel less like a side project and more like a core console title. Speaking about core titles, Tales of Hearts sees the return of the Sorcerer's Ring, along with the multiple functionalities unlocked gradually over the game. Via the touchscreen, the functions of the Sorcerer's Ring can be changed to burn, pull and push different objects in the game, allowing the party to complete dungeons. Unfortunately for fans of the Sorcerer's Ring, this will be the last mainline game in the series to use the classic item. While Tales of Hearts does a lot of things to feel like a classic Team Destiny Tales game, one notable exclusion has been the use of a full 3D overworld. In fact, Tales of Hearts doesn't initially have a traditional overworld. Instead, between towns, the party will navigate a series of paths made to look more like a dungeon than a traditional overworld. This will go on to be the series standard for all future entries. Now, while I'm not the biggest fan of traditional overworlds, Tales of Hearts' approach is not good. For starters, most locations in the overworld look the same, with the same roads, trees and bridges seen everywhere. Plus, there is little indication to where you are in the world outside of continually opening the world map. The result is a very maze-like navigation between towns that is very disorientating. Luckily, you can later unlock an overworld after exploring all the field dungeons in a specific region. This is a rather bare-bones overworld though, with no materials or enemy encounters, and it mostly exists just to act as a quick navigation between different towns and dungeons. On the other hand, Tales of Hearts does make overworld navigation a little bit more bearable due to the use of contact encounters, the only 2D game to primarily use such encounters. This is a welcome change to the annoyance random encounters brought in the previous 2D Tales games, even if Hearts does go back to the infamous black blob monsters from Symphonia. Also, unlike Tales of Innocence, I find myself mostly able to avoid enemy encounters, with the monsters no longer spawning on top of my character, although the occasional cheap encounter does happen. If removing the overworld wasn't enough, the game also removes equipment. While characters can still equip accessories, weapons and armour are no longer a thing. Instead, characters will rely on the Soma system. Each character will have their own personal Soma, a weapon that can be upgraded over time to give the characters new skills which come in the form of art, passive abilities and increasing base stats. These skills are purchased using material found across the world or dropped by monsters. If enough skills are purchased, you will unlock the ability to evolve your character's Soma. Each time this happens, you will have the option of 3 new Soma to evolve into, which will vary in stats, elemental attribute and what skills they can unlock. Somas are also used to allow the party members to enter into people's hearts in a process called Spiria Link. Once inside a person's heart, or as they call it Spiria, the party will be faced with a randomly generated maze environment called a Spiria Nexus, in which they'll be on the clock to find the core of the Spiria or face a game over. These Spiria Nexus generally exist as part of the main story, but several are accessible as side options and are a good way to grind for materials. Exploring the Spiria Nexus, Shin, Hisumi and Kohaku are joined by 3 other party members, once again giving us 6 characters. First to join the 3 is Beryl Benito, a small girl who inspires to be a court painter, even going as far as to use a Soma that looks like a giant paintbrush. Next to join is Ines Lorenz, a female merchant with superhuman strength who winds up contracting the group to work for her. The final party member is Kunzanite, an ancient combat android whose purpose is to protect the being Lithia who lives inside Kohaku's Spiria. Throughout the game, the party will also be able to bring their Spiria together by fighting alongside one another, as well as through special dialogue responses makeable in the skits. Along with Soma, the party can also use Hillstones to keep the party healthy. Hillstones work in a similar fashion to the food bag from Tales of Destiny PS2, in which the party can set conditions which, when met, result in the party healing a set amount of health at the cost of a set amount of Hillstones. Over time, the player can unlock the ability to hold more Hillstones, as well as gain additional triggers and effects to use. This all come in great benefit when it comes to battle. Tales of Hearts gives us one of the series' last 2D battle systems in the form of the Combination Aerial Linear Motion Battle System, or CNAR LMBS. In fact, to my knowledge, after this game, the only other Tales game with a 2D battle system would be the 2010 PSP remake Tales of Phantasia Narikiri Dungeon X. As the format which literally gave birth to the series and defined it well into the 6th generation, it's kinda sad to see it end, even if I personally am more attached to the 3D games. Either way, how does it play? Well, as you might expect, with the game being based on Tales of Destiny PS2, we have a very similar combat system. CC returns instead of TP, but is now a gauge rather than a number. This is called the emotional gauge, or EG, and much like CC, it will deplete by making attacks, with arts deplete the gauge even faster. Once depleted, you'll no longer be able to make attacks, and you'll need to wait for the gauge to recharge. Low EG uniquely also leaves you with reduced defense, somewhat de-incentivizing you running it down to 0 in a long combo. Once you stop comboing, your character will regain EG back up to their EG regeneration stat. However, if your character gets hit by the enemy, then they will regain additional EG. This somewhat acts as a comeback mechanic, allowing for your bullied characters to strike back with extended combos. Speaking of extended combos, I find the EG gauge very generous in how many attacks I am able to make in comparison to games like Destiny PS2 and Graces. If during a combo the enemy is hit by an attack whose attribute it's weak to, you'll begin a weak combo, with all additional attacks in the combo being treated as if the enemy is weak to them too. To counter this almost broken combo play, the battle system does have some limitations, such as once again being limited to a party of 3, just like the other DS Tales games. A lot of characters also have somewhat slow attacks and limited ranges in their hitboxes, which prevent you from just spamming attacks to win. Shing is a good choice for someone who wants to counter the character's slow attacks. Using his Soma Asteria, he can dish out rapid attacks, including some arts which give him additional range. His high speed does result in him lacking power to his attacks, but his use of light and lightning based arts combined with a few fire arts does allow him to open up the enemy to a myriad of weakness combos. Kohaku wields the Soma Rondeyu, which takes the form of a baton, although she often resorts to kicking the enemy when in up-close combat. Kohaku is also a pretty decent caster, with the majority of the game's fire spells, along with a bit of wind and light. She also has a handful of healing spells, although the role of healer is usually done by her brother. Hisui uses the Soma Gale Arc, which comes in the form of two wrist-mounted crossbows that allow him to shoot bursts of energy with his fingertips. Along with being able to attack at a distance, Hisui can cast a series of wind spells as well as the majority of the game's healing spells, making him the default healer. Beryl's Soma Terracotta, which looks like a giant paintbrush, is a poor weapon in up-close combat, instead primarily being used to cast spells. This makes Beryl the primary spellcaster of the party, being able to cast water, earth and dark spells, as well as supportive buffs for the party. Ines takes on a very tank-like role with her high damage but slow attacks. Her Soma Phosius takes the form of a giant blade, which along with hitting hard also has several water-based attacks. Finishing up the cast is Kunzanite, who also takes on a tank-like role like Ines. His Soma Vex not only grants him a pair of blades in his arms, but also two additional arms which look like scorpion tails. Insert General Grievous meme here.
You fool!
I've been trained in your Soma arts by Lithius Bodomini.
Arts-wise, Kunzanite has a myriad of classic arts along with several wind and dark enhanced arts, as well as a series of debuffing spells. Now, while only 3 characters can be in the battle party, additional members can be called upon using the combination gauge. This CG gauge is displayed underneath the health bar and is used for mystic arts, as well as whenever the player orders another party member to use an art. This includes arts ordered using the battle menu or via shortcuts set to the touchscreen. While it's kind of annoying that this basic task now costs energy to use, the advantage comes when you order characters outside the battle party. Using the control player's own CG, you can call and reserve party members to use arts and spells, and, in New Game Plus, you can even call a whole host of cameo characters from the Tales series and other Namco IPs, including my favourite character Cosmos version 4 from Xenosaga Episode 3. As per usual, Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura returned to compose the music for this game, alongside newcomer Hiroshi Tamura. With the game being on the DS, the trio would return to the series' roots of MIDI-based compositions, as seen with the battle themes like Mystery Arms Soma. Despite my fondness for the MIDI tracks of Fantasia and Destiny, I find Tales of Hearts' soundtrack overall to be quite lame. One of the biggest issues has to be the lack of a standout piece. In nearly all other Tales games there is at least 1 or 2 tracks that I really like, but that's not really the case with Hearts. I find a lot of the battle melodies quite underwhelming in comparison to past games, and the use of crazy fast-paced synths leaves a lot of tracks feeling chaotic and not musically pleasing. Sorry if you're a fan of this soundtrack, as personally it's my least favourite in the series. On the other hand, voice acting is back from Tales of Innocence, and it's roughly on the same bar. At the end of the day, I don't know Japanese well enough to say if the voice work is better or worse. However, what I can say is an improvement over Innocence has to be the opening title. Tales of Hearts has a rather unique opening in comparison to previous DS Tales games. Rather than the usual single screen affair as we've seen in all past Tales games, Hearts decides to utilise both screens at once to deliver a rather unique opening in which screens will display 2 shots at once or display one extended shot across both screens. With Tales of Hearts somewhat being a sequel to the PS2 remake of Tales of Destiny, it feels fitting that J-pop band Dean returns to do the opening song after doing the opening song for Tales of Destiny. Their song, Einne no Ishita, or Eternal Tomorrow, is a beautiful ballad that I love to listen to. While I personally think that Destiny's Yume de Arayuni ever so slightly beats out this song, they are both incredible pieces that are both in my top 5 for best opening songs in the series. The Namco Tales Studio once again shows us how they are a cut above any third-party studio when it comes to making a Tales game. Tales of Hearts is definitely the definitive DS Tales game. With Tales of the Tempest, the game felt stripped of content and there was hardly a game left to play. Meanwhile, Tales of Innocence's attempt to try and reach parity with the 6th-gen Tales games just exposed how much it was compromised to work on the DS. As a 2D Tales game, Hearts delivers an experience that is both content-rich while not feeling compromised. While I don't think the game is better than any of its 6th gen predecessors, with the exception of maybe Legendia, Hearts is still a fun game to play on the DS. Its progression system is relatively simple, allowing for different setups depending on which Soma you choose to evolve into. The emotional gauge also allows for a lot of freedom in comboing due to the sheer number of hits characters can make, allowing one to easily practice different combo techniques. On the other hand, the emotion gauge does somewhat trivialise combat by making it way too easy to spam attacks in comparison to previous games. Also, I might be doing something wrong, but spells feel very weak in this game, resulting in me often completely focusing in melee combat. Outside of combat, I also have a few issues with navigation. The field dungeons are a massive downgrade from the previous world maps, and navigating them is made unnecessarily difficult due to the paths not lining up with the 8 direction inputs on the D-pad. Also, despite somewhat fixing the problem, I still find myself getting attacked by undodgeable monsters who spawn right on top of me. In general, I enjoy Tales of Hearts DS a lot more than Tales of Hearts R, due to its more interesting battle system and use of contact encounters over random encounters. However, the DS version can't fix arguably my biggest issues with the game, and that has to be the story. Hearts' plot is very much a by-the-numbers Tales plot, and the main characters do little to counter that. There's a reason Kohaku appears more often in other media over Shing, because Shing is arguably one of the weakest Tales protagonists in the series. While the limitations of being on the DS can excuse the gameplay, there is no excuse to justify this massive drop in quality between this game and Tales of Vesperia, which literally came out only a few months earlier. Perhaps a lot of the plot was undermined by the fact that another Tales game was being developed by Team Destiny that would come out next year. This game would be none other than Tales of Graces, which will be the focus of my next retrospective.